Hey everyone, I'm back for another video. Today we're going to talk about the great debate, Airbus versus Boeing. Which is better and why? I'm personally type rated on both the Airbus A320 series and the Boeing 767, 757 series. That allows me to fly the A321, the A320, and the A319. I've flown all three of those models for about 4 years, one as a first officer, three as a captain. And I'm also type rated in the Boeing 767, 757 series. However, I've only flown the 767 as a first officer for just over 2 years now. First, Boeing. Born and bred right here in the US of A, just outside Seattle, Washington. They have their main factory where it's manufactured, flight test, engineered, you name it. If you've never been to the factory, I highly recommend it. It's an awesome place to go for both aviation lovers and non alike. Airbus is born and bred in Europe, manufactured, engineered, and flight tested over there. So as far as a company, manufacturer, a proud American, 1 point Boeing. Next, gonna go with comfortability. Which one's more comfortable? Airbus definitely has a smaller flight deck than the Boeing 767 as far as width and length. I can stand up again at 6'4", no problem in the 767. I can stand up without hunching over in the A320 as well, as long as my back is right up against the flight deck door and I'm at the very top of where the circuit breakers go. My head, my hair, depending on how I shape it that day, might just touch it. So the flight deck's definitely wider and more spacious in the Boeing. However, two huge differences between the Boeing and the Airbus. That's got to be the control wheel. So the Boeing has this big kind of bulky, almost boat-like control wheel with a control column attached to the floor that takes up a lot of space. The Airbus has just a little joystick just to the right or left of your armrest, depending on if you're the captain or first officer. And there's all that empty space between basically where you're sitting and where the flight deck instruments are. What they did to replace that space, Airbus came out with an awesome design to have a tray table. It's definitely one of my favorite features of the Airbus. As far as comfortability goes, no doubt about it, Airbus 1 point there. It's just so much nicer. The difference between Airbus and Boeing and which one I like better has to be the altitude control switch. So traffic control gives us altitudes to climb or descend to. We dial that number into our altitude controller. Well, for whatever reason, Boeing, you only have one option. As you spin the knob, it only goes up by hundreds of feet. So for example, it goes 9,000 feet, 9,100 feet, 9,200 feet, so on and so forth, all the way up to your cruise altitude. So yeah, you can spin it really fast, but it still only moves by hundreds. It drives me nuts. On the Airbus, they have a little toggle switch. So you can either go by hundreds or for 99% of the time you're flying, you leave it in this 1000 detent. So every time you move the altitude controller knob, it goes up by thousands. So 9,000, 10,000, 11,000, 12,000. And when you're flying around 99.9% of the time, you're gonna be at even altitudes. Small examples, when you're descending on approach, you might be at hundreds of altitudes, but for the most part, we're always at even altitudes, 9,000, 12,000, 18,000, 36,000 feet, so on and so forth. So the Airbus, I don't know why Boeing doesn't have this feature, but the Airbus blows it out of the water with that. I already mentioned it before, but it's probably the biggest difference between Boeing and Airbus is when you're sitting in the flight deck, one has a little control stick or joystick, and one has this big control wheel almost. And man, the joystick is weird at first to fly. It's kind of like a big video game, and it takes some getting used to because every other airplane, conventional airplane that you grow up training on, is a control wheel. But once you fly on the simulator and the airplane for about 5, 10, 15 hours or so, it's like second nature and it's awesome. I mean, the fact that you have this big bulky wheel in the way makes no sense after you can fly this little joystick that clears up all this space. So I have to give another point for Airbus there because it makes the airplane so much more comfortable to fly. Next, talk about reliability. So like I said, I flew in the Airbus for about 4 years, Boeing 767 for about 2 years. And I do have to say, in my opinion, I think the Boeing aircraft are stronger built, less maintenance issues. They're built to withstand the worst of turbulence, the worst of landings, not mine, of course, but people I've flown with landings, and they're like tanks. They never break. They never have any real issues. I feel like as far as flight delays or cancellations, very, very rarely on a Boeing 767. Not like the Airbus aren't built great. However, they just feel like they're less of a tank, like they're more of a Chevy Malibu. No offense to the Chevy Malibu owners out there. But it just feels like there's more issues with them maintenance-wise. Nothing safety related, but it's a lot of like computer resets and software updates and things like that. So I have to give another point to Boeing as far as maintenance delays and aircraft that are more reliable. Which one's easier to fly and which one's more enjoyable to fly? So first, easier to fly. I'd have to say the Airbus logic at first is very confusing because again, it's not like any other conventional aircraft you've ever flown before. It's not like any other Boeing or Beechcraft or Cessna or anything like that. It's foreign, literally foreign from another country, from Europe. So at first it's very confusing, but I will say once you understand the logic between Airbus and how they set up their systems with color coded and numbers and all this stuff, it ends up making a lot of sense. And I think is actually easier once you actually have it figured out. Boeing, it makes sense, it's logical, but just little things. Like for example, if you ever fly the Boeing 767, you look up at the fuel panel, they have the tanks laid out, left tank, center tank, right tank. The center tanks are really not the center tanks or the cross feed tanks. The center tanks are down here. And it just kind of, I've seen so many pilots mess that up when transferring fuel on the ground or something like that, that it just, Airbus has the logics down just so much better in my opinion. The old adage with Airbus is it's built by geniuses to be flown by idiots. Now, you may have your own opinions of me, that's perfectly fine, but it is true. They built the Airbus in order for pilots with not that many hours to be able to handle not only flying the airplane, but the logistics and how the airplane systems work and how they operate. So it really is probably the smartest machine I've ever flown in my entire life. Super pilot friendly as far as climbing, descending, landing, VNAV descents, all that kind of stuff. Another thing that I'm gonna have to give another point to Airbus for over Boeing is airspeed control. So when you're descending on a VNAV arrival into, say, LAX, air traffic control or the navigation charts that we have give us certain speeds that we have to fly at. Well, the airplane knows this back in New York before we even take off. So it's all planning and computing when it has to descend, at what speed, at what altitude, and all that good stuff. Airbus never had an issue. It descended at the right point. The speeds were always on, maybe plus or minus a couple knots, which is not a big deal whatsoever. And you're good to go. It flies it just like it's planned to. Boeing, on the other hand, every single time I'm on a descent, the airspeed's off, it starts descending late or too slow or too fast. I don't know what the heck it is. It always requires pilot intervention in order to kind of solve the issue or fix the problem. Now you might say, oh, well, maybe that's just the pilot. You could be absolutely right. But from experience, looking to my left at the captain who's flying, who has a lot of experience in the Boeing 767, it happens to them all the time as well. So I personally don't think it's a pilot thing. I personally think it's a Boeing 767 thing. Just something with the software and the programming. It's an old computer. These things were built years and years ago and engineered years and years ago, where it's just not up to date in my opinion. So another point for Airbus as far as airplanes flying exactly how you want them to and how you expect them to. Finally, as far as actually hand flying the airplane, which one's more enjoyable? I have to go with Boeing. It just feels like you're in more control. It really takes your inputs exactly how you expect the airplane to act. It behaves. Airbus, it does the same thing, but with a little joystick, you kind of feel like you're almost getting pushed around in the wind and you don't have as much control over the airplane as you do in a Boeing. Now, you absolutely do have just as much control, just the kind of like that feeling, or maybe it's that mental disconnect because you're not really turning it left and right. All you're really doing is giving inputs to a computer that they're then giving inputs to the flight controls and moving the airplane. So it's gonna be another point for Boeing. I lost track of the total points, but overall, all things considered, comfortability, reliability, flyability, most fun, best landings, without a doubt, in my opinion, the better airplane to fly, Airbus. Airbus all the way. I wish my company had newer Airbuses. I would love to fly like the A350. I'm hoping that we do get them in the near future because I would love to get on it either as a first officer, eventually as a captain, and fly that airplane for the rest of my career. Curious to know what you think. Drop a comment below. As always, any personal aviation questions, feel free to DM me on Instagram. Make sure you give me a follow first so that I can actually see the inbox message. I answer all of them. I'll get back to you. And yeah, hope you enjoyed the video. I'll talk to you next time.